Thank you very much for the invitation to come up here and to speak today. I've got quite a lot of slides. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but I'm hoping it'll be a good overview. So focusing particularly on consumer food waste, but also referring to the relevance to nutrition and food safety, because we have been very aware of that since we started work in this area in 2007. So to give some insights from our research, but also from the practical action we've taken on the ground to help people waste less food. A little bit about WRAP. We are, as of December last year, now a charity. We are also still a delivery body for all four governments of the UK. And as an organisation, we're all about working with businesses or the public sector or with consumers to help reduce waste and increase resource efficiency. So we work with a wide range of organisations and individuals and have the four strategic areas which are outlined there, one of which is food. And we've worked on food and food waste prevention in particular since before 2007, but really 2007 when we started the work in earnest. And we now work along the whole supply chain, from farm to fork and beyond. And the mechanisms that WRAP uses are a combination of voluntary agreements with different sectors or responsibility deals called different things, and also consumer-facing campaigns. So Love Food, Hate Waste, we've heard mentioned already, and that's our primary means of communicating with people. We also run the Recycle Now campaign, which you might well have come across. But concentrating on the consumer element today, and this slide really just outlines why we work on consumer food waste and why it's important to do so. About half of the food that's thrown away in the UK comes from or is linked to consumers. The majority of that comes from households, so the 4.2 million tonne figure we've heard mentioned. What does that mean for people? Well, £700 a year for the average family. We've quantified the amount of fresh produce that gets thrown away. What does that mean in terms of portions of 5 a day a year? That's 13 billion for the country. 17 million tonnes of CO2 associated with food waste, 4% of the UK's water footprint. So there are financial, environmental, social reasons why it's important to tackle food waste. Looking forward, there's also an element of food security. 5.5 million more people thought to be in the UK by 2025, which at the current rate of consumption would need another 4 million tonnes of food. So we can't just keep producing food. I mean, this isn't just about the UK, this is obviously a global issue. So there's lots of policy drivers, lots of reasons why it's important to tackle food waste, and that little box on the right-hand side just shows that most of what we throw away is preventable. So whether that's things like apples and yogurts, or whether it's things like bread crusts and potato peelings, which some people eat and some people don't. And although we're a delivery body, having a robust evidence base, as with the FSA, is incredibly important for us, because in order to develop an effective campaign and develop messages which resonate with people, they need to be based on evidence. And if we're working with the food industry and we want the food industry to take action, those recommendations have to be based on evidence as well. And I'm only going to touch on a few pieces of this. There's a link there to a PDF which contains references to all of our research, so that's an easy way of finding what we've done. And we've looked at not just the waste that's thrown away, but we've looked at socio-demographics. We've looked at very specific behaviours around storage. We've looked at practices like using the fridge and using the freezer. We've looked at specific food categories like bread. So there's a huge resource there. And just some more background slides really. This is from some research we published in 2013, which shows some of the understanding we've got about the types of food and drink that are thrown away. So thousands of tonnes on the top axis, the category of food and drink, and within that, the self-reported reasons to why that food and drinks thrown away. So you'll see on the whole, the more perishable the food is, the more likely it is to be thrown away. The reasons why people throw away different types of food vary by category, which is not surprising. So overall, the most common reason is because we just don't use the food in time. So 2 million tonnes at least never reaches the plate, never reaches the cooker. And of that, 1 million tonnes doesn't even get opened. So it's thrown away as it was bought. And that's very common for products like fresh fruit and veg. People cooking, preparing and serving too much. Again, very large category. Drinks, meals, rice and pasta. And then what you might expect to be dominant reasons are actually not that key. So personal preference, the kids not wanting to eat the food, or burning the toast and dropping food on the floor, relatively minor contributions. But those are self-reported reasons and a very simplistic way of showing why food gets thrown away. This was a chart that Tom Quested put together a number of years ago, which is a sort of conceptual framework. Here we've got the basic behaviours around food preparation and use, food waste, and then the environmental impact of food waste. And there's obviously a lot of things that influence those behaviours, or even directly whether or not food gets eaten or thrown away. So I'm not going to go through the detail, but it just illustrates the complexity and the internal and the external factors that affect that. And also, when you're thinking about food waste as we do, we've got to be very aware, and I think, Sian, you said this, people don't think in little boxes. So when you're buying food, when you're in the kitchen, there's lots of things that you're thinking about, or sometimes you're not thinking about any of them, around packaging or food prices or health, provenance of the food, whether or not you've got a food waste collection and how that affects what you think about food waste, and food safety, obviously. So it's a complex situation to be trying to develop an understanding of cause and effect and solutions. A couple of slides from some research we carried out a couple of years ago, where we were trying to understand the relationship between people's views on packaging and people's views on food waste. And we were interested in that because actually there's a lot of evidence to suggest that well-designed packaging can help people reduce food waste, but the perceptions that people have around packaging means that they're not getting the best out of that packaging. But we didn't want to dive right into asking questions about food waste or packaging. So we asked a couple of general questions. The first one was what influences your choice in store? And lots of people have carried out surveys like this, from Which to FSA and others. And I think it just illustrates what we all know, really, that things like price and value for money and promotions are still really important for people. And then it's about quality, it's about shelf life. But what starts to come through are things that we can link to the likelihood of food being thrown away or not. So things like the freshness and the shelf life, the way products are packaged, the pack size. So, can I buy the right amount? How long is it going to last when I get it home? How fresh is it? All of those, people aren't necessarily buying for that reason in terms of wasting less food, but we know it can have an influence on whether the food gets eaten or not. And then being a bit more explicit, and this is an adaptation of an FSA question, if you ask people outright what concerns them around food, you can come up with a ranking like this. And again, food waste is there, and it's sort of gone up the ranking over the years, but you've got a mixture, obviously, of nutritional, health, food safety, but price and quality above all else. Now, we published some research, and this is very complementary to the Food and You work, trying to understand some of these direct and indirect influences on whether or not food gets thrown away. And this links back to the compositional research that was mentioned, so actually measuring what people throw away, then carrying out multiple surveys and a diary to try and establish what correlates with the food that's thrown away. And we find socio-demographic correlations, but then underneath that, there are indications of what's really driving those differences. And whether that's how much time people have available, whether it's their skill levels, whether it's the fact they've got children or not, it's complex. And I'll just show a couple of these. Household size has been mentioned. And what we find, not surprisingly, is as your household gets bigger, you produce more food waste. But actually, if you look at it on a per person basis, it's the people living on their own that have a disproportionate amount of food waste. And it's costing this group of people a lot more money. And the underlying reasons are linked to being able to buy the right pack size, knowing how to cook the right amount. And this is a mixture of older and younger people. You pull out age, and again, you have a clear difference between younger and older people, with older people wasting less food. And again, you can start to see differences that potentially link back to skills, as Julian said, with older people perhaps being more confident about how long you can keep leftovers for, maybe too long, maybe not, and portioning the right amounts. And this is quite recent as we've tried to understand this link between health and food waste. And what this was suggesting is that one of the reasons that perhaps people are wasting more food is striving towards a healthier diet or striving to provide the freshest food, but not necessarily having the skills to manage that. So there are correlations between people's stated objectives and goals and the amount of food they're throwing away. But this one gives us some hope for the future, and that the people that seem to have an established healthy diet, or at least they perceive that they've got a healthy diet, actually waste less. So that might be suggesting that once people know how to manage the food they're buying and are confident about it, there's no reason per se that a healthy diet should be a more wasteful diet. And just quickly about children, overall we don't have evidence to suggest that people with children waste more than people without. It suggests that children act as little adults, so in some ways you can argue they're producing, again, disproportionately too much food waste for their size. But some of the insights around the behaviours link back to what Sian said. It does look like people with children are more risk averse, so they are less likely to use up leftovers, they're more likely to be conservative around date labelling. So I think there are links there. Now for us, I was quite pleased in the introductory slide, the checklist of how you should think about communicating to consumers. I'm not saying we've ticked all those off, but I think we have spent a lot of time thinking about what motivates people. We've tested a lot of messages. We've thought about the different segments of people that we're trying to communicate with and target. What always comes back, or since we started this work, is the potential to save money is the major motivator. And we've made good use of that, but we really don't want to just focus on that because it partly devalues food and it goes against what we're trying to do in the long term. So tapping into some of these other motivations in terms of why people are concerned about food generally in relationship with food is really important. So moving on to what we've actually done in terms of helping reduce food waste, we've tried to have as much as possible an integrated approach, and that's at different levels. So the obvious one is you can't just run a TV campaign, you can't just rely on local cookery schools, you can't just work with industry to do choice editing. You need to combine all of those, which we've tried to do. But also it is about joining up complementary messaging and avoiding confusion with consumers, and I'll come on to some of that. And it's about evolving over time. So when we started back in 2007, it was a different world. It was pre-economic downturn. We had money to advertise, we had money to develop nice advertisements that we could place in the relevant magazines. We could afford to go to the Good Food Show and have a stand. It was interesting time. And we've moved, and I think actually we've learned a lot in this process, to making much more use of social media, much greater use of partnership working with retailers or with charities, using apps, cascade training with a whole range of NGOs and charities. So the approach has evolved over time, as has the messaging. And yeah, work with a lot of people, and interestingly, the feedback from a lot of the people we work with is come on guys, you've got to join up more. You know, one day we're having a meeting with Department of Health or Change for Life, the next day you guys come in, and then we might have Food Safety Week on the agenda the week after that. So for the people delivering behaviour change and solutions, they want to see this joined up approach as much as we do. And a little bit about products, because yes, behaviour change is important, but you can complement and you can make it easier for people by changing products. And Sian mentioned display until dates. And we've been working with industry for the last 4 years, and the use of display until dates is going down dramatically. Sell-by has almost disappeared. A lot of products where it's safe to are moving from a use-by to a best before, so people have that greater flexibility. Lots of resealable, reclosable packaging, increasing shelf life to give people longer to eat the food. So there's a lot you can do here. Absolutely critical that we link up, as we do with people like the Food Standards Agency, so that you're not risking health and you're not confusing people by tinkering with labelling in a way that doesn't make sense. And a joined up approach is critical, I've said that. And right from the beginning, we've worked with the Food Standards Agency, so we knew, and I've got a background in industry before I joined RAP. You know, if you're talking to industry or consumers about things like date labelling and changing freezing guidance, you have to incorporate food safety. So I think we've done a reasonable job at that. It's a struggle getting the messaging right around food waste prevention and collection. So as more and more households have separate food waste collections, that can become a justification or a way of ridding you of guilt if you've got somewhere to put the food. So that's an ongoing challenge. Food and packaging, I've talked about. What we want to do much more on is around food waste and safety and health messaging. Your Fridge is Your Friend was Food Safety Week that we jointly ran and joint branded with FSA. This Love Food Hate Waste Partner Guide was an initiative we ran at the end of last year as a toe in the water, sort of eat well, waste less, and that was trying to bridge the gap between things like the 5-a-day guidance and the Love Food Hate Waste guidance about how to store your fruit and veg to make it last longer. So we're trying to do that. This is an example of the initiative on packaging. So this was, I guess it's just an illustration of doing the fundamental research and then translating that into a range of materials which we can use to communicate directly with consumers around the benefits of packaging. Also with in-store activity, this is Marks and Spencer's, and Tesco's have just put Love Food Hate Waste and this messaging on their fresh produce. So it's a way of making sure that we're reaching a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And date labelling, I probably don't need to talk about this anymore, but this stepwise approach from doing the research, then what was the additional step here was making sure we worked to update the official guidance to industry. So again, with FSA and the DEFRA labelling team, to make sure that industry wasn't just listening to RAP, there was official guidance that was updated. And as I say, we're now seeing that change happening on shelf. Lots of obvious synergies between what we're trying to do on food waste and other policy objectives. So we talk about planning, we talk about choosing the right foods, we talk about portioning, we talk about safe storage and optimal storage, and we give people lots of recipe advice. So whether you're thinking about food safety, whether you're thinking about obesity and diet, or whether you're thinking about sustainable food and eating less meat, there's obvious synergies, whether you're talking to consumers or whether you're talking to industry. And this is just an example of on the ground. A lot of local authorities and charities are doing this as a matter of course, because partly they can't afford to run separate classes and workshops on food waste or sustainability or health, but also because they know it makes sense. You know, people don't want to be told different things relating to food. They want to hear it all in one go. And this, a very, very small study in Leicestershire looked at working with 3 families to try and help them throw away less food. And what they fed back were the ways that they'd achieved that. And I think it's just interesting looking at some of these, because again, it shows the links between what people might do to waste less food that might have other benefits. And the one that I looked at was, don't have biscuits in between meals, because that means you're still hungry when you have your evening meal. Now, WRAP wouldn't put that out as a message, but this is what people are feeding back. Actually, they established themselves that was a good way to waste less food. Right, almost finished. Has what we've been doing worked? Well, I think the evidence would suggest yes, and when I say we, this isn't just WRAP, this is obviously all of our partners. So the 4.2 million tonne figure that we've heard about in terms of UK household food waste was 5.3 in 2007. So that's a 21% reduction over that 5 years. And we think about half of that reduction has been down to the interventions. So yes, the recession's had an impact, et cetera, et cetera. And we want to halve that. We want to halve this level by 2025. So that's the ambition. Danger of unintended consequences, that was mentioned. If we were to move towards the Eat Well diet with more perishable food being bought, we've worked out food waste could go in completely the wrong direction. It might be 1 million tonnes higher if people aren't confident about how to store that food. So we've got to be very conscious of that. We're going to be launching a new voluntary agreement next year, and this time it's going to be a 10-year agreement. And the idea is that this has quite a broad scope in terms of sustainable production and sustainable consumption. And we were at Department of Health and Public Health England yesterday. So what we're saying is we don't want to be just talking about waste in the future. And this isn't WRAP trying to take over the world. This is saying under this banner we could be more joined up than we are now. And just the summary slide, as I've said, tackling waste isn't really about waste. Lots of synergies in the behaviours and the skills. Lots of very good reason for joining up more and taking a more integrated approach. And hopefully we can collaborate more. And I think some of these insights around risk and decision making could be very helpful. Thank you very much.